Boom! What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan. Very excited to be talking about behavior design and gamification. We have Chou joining us on the show. Hello.
Hello. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming on, brother. Really appreciate
it's a pleasure.
it. Yeah, we have so much to talk about. Chou's background is awesome. Chou is the original creator of the Octalysis Framework, a gamification pioneer, behavioral designer, and author/keynote speaker. He's president of the Octalysis Group and founder of Octalysis Prime, which is a gamified mentorship platform. His work has empowered over 1 billion users' experiences across the world. And this is his most recent book, Actionable Gamification, which you can check out below. We'll be talking about this quite a bit throughout the conversation today. All right, Chou. Let's start things off with this big history perspective on civilization. We find ourselves as stewards of Earth. What is your current take on the state of humanity?
Okay, so I think for most of human history, a lot of things are just about survival, not just about thriving. You know, the times are hard, diseases, and we're getting to a place where I think in the last few decades, it's about enabling technology that brings us, more capabilities. So then you have the hardware wave and the software. Now we're getting to a very interesting space because now we see, oh wow, there's technology, there's software, we can interact with technology, but we're not happier, right? Our brains are more delighted. And so now we're getting to a place of, okay, what can make us happier? What can give us more meaning? And this is why you see this wave, in San Francisco, where the technology wave is. Now people are talking about mindfulness, right? Spirituality, about human-focused design, about how do you add more meaning and purpose, about starting with why. All that stuff is what we start to crave for, because once we satisfy those survival needs and these functional needs, now we want to have inspirational needs. And I think we're getting to that world where just because you have great technology and features and technology and all just the stuff like that is not enough for us. We need to figure out what empowers the human spirit and connects people together, and they feel less lonely, less depressed. So I think that's where we're at. We're at a place where the brain matters a lot and feelings matter a lot. So a lot of people like what I do and some other people is now really just focus on, okay, how do you empower humans, not just products and features and technology?
Yeah, you make it clear that a lot of the millions of years of evolution that got us to this point of this technology explosion was, and we'll show a graphic with this, is just more of the bottom primordial needs of Maslow's hierarchy, and now a majority of what we crave with the explosion of technology is meaning, purpose, fulfillment, self-actualization, and transcendence. And so you've created really a framework that gives that brings this all to light for people, and we'll be unpacking that in a bit. Chou, let's ask you about your journey and how you got to this point. You're born in Taiwan, then spent some time in South Africa, and then you moved back to Taiwan, and then Kansas, then Los Angeles, and you started a couple companies and really got into gaming a lot, and then figuring out some of these tactics, and now you've built yourself up till here. Tell us about this.
Well, I wasn't gaming beforehand, and I got into gamification when I started my company. So my father's a diplomat from Taiwan, so we would move a lot, like you said, to different countries. I was in South Africa from 2 years old to 8 years old. And my life experience was basically I get thrown in an environment, I don't speak the language very well, I'm behind in school, I'm socially awkward, and then I just try to work hard to catch up to people. I observe how people feel and how to gain some respect. So I start to catch up. And then once I feel like, yeah, I figured this out, I'm thriving, then I get thrown in an environment where I completely suck again, and I start all over. And I think that allows me to have this perseverance, to have this empathy. These are all skills that I later on harness substantially. I have a worldview about, okay, because if you grow up in one culture, you'll think, oh, this is how the world works, this is how society works, this is how humans are, you can't change it. But when you go to another country, like, wow, things that were considered polite and correct in one country is offensive here.
Yes.
So then you start seeing things from multiple angles. And
multiple worldviews, that's crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all these hilarious stories that I have that I just got penalized greatly, and people don't like me, and all
like
that stuff.
The way you were interacting with kids in Taiwan versus the way you interact with kids in South Africa versus in Kansas, these were completely different.
Yeah, even the teachers don't like me. Yeah. So because the way I operate, like what's considered a good behaving student in one place would be drastically different in another place.
These are very important things to be able to pass along to others that may not have left their own cultures yet. And so the importance of leaving your own culture is very important. Yeah. Okay.
Here's one interesting example. People these days talk about I don't know if you've heard about the China social credit system.
Yeah, Sesame credit.
The Sesame credit. They basically have a FICO score on being a good citizen, right? In terms of just going to, just researching patriotic things, buying Chinese product as opposed to foreign products, and even the friends you make will affect your score. And from the Western culture, to look at that and like, wow, that's like censorship, that's like complete dictatorship and tyrannical control. But when you look in the culture in China, they don't mind. Most of them don't mind that. They think this is really good. I've had friends who say, in the US, there's no cameras everywhere. I feel less safe. In China, everywhere there's a camera, so there's safety. Like the government's watching if people are committing crime, and they feel good about that. So in the Chinese culture is that you generally believe in your leader and you follow the leader and you do your part well, right? And
interesting.
Yeah, and of course the leader proves to be too tyrannical sometimes in history. They'll overthrow the dynasty and whatnot. But generally, you listen to the emperor. You listen to, and historically they believe emperors are installed by this heavenly divinity. It's like this is the emperor, and there's the golden dragon that's in his blood, right? So in that culture, they don't mind that as long as they believe the government is okay, and a lot of them do think it's okay. They think this helps us have more order in society.
Interesting. So then the characters are playing their roles in the great game of the development of China towards prosperity. But with a little bit more, it's kind of gamified in a sense with the social credit. I mean, the US has its own gamification with capitalism and free markets and putting up the individual.
Sure.
So it's kind of like different code and different.
Yeah, so I'm not saying the moral implications of it myself. I'm just saying there's viewpoints. But I think one way to understand it better from our Western view is think about, like, you have a dad, and the dad's really strict. He has all these systems and rules. It doesn't allow you to do this, and he monitors that. But we believe that our dad loves us and is good for us, right? So we think, okay, I guess system is fine. He's making us study harder to get in college, whatever. Yeah. He's teaching us hard lessons in life. So because we trust our dads, most of us, and when there's a harder system, we don't mind it. So, but we think, government shouldn't have that type of power here, right? But in China, a lot of people believe government is the same thing. When there's more systems, there's more observation and there's more power. It's a good thing. It helps us keep society in order.
Like a thoughtful mom and dad, loving, with guidance and direction towards that prosperity. Yeah. Just sometimes maybe like younger people or the individuals could have good ideas that might not get heard and stuff like that.
That dynamic's all there. So going back to my story, as I've grown up, I became a very heavy gamer. And I think the turning point in my life was 2003 when I was playing this game called Diablo 2.
Yep.
And I spent thousands of hours, getting more gear, leveling up, getting gold, just perfecting all the skills. And it got to a point where all my friends started quitting the game and they moved on to other games. So I quit too. And I was in this transitional period between quitting a game and starting a new game. And I just felt extremely empty. I'm like, wow, all those thousands of hours I invested into this game is just gone.
Yeah.
Like part of my life just disappeared. And so it was a dark, depressing feel. And I thought, well, would it be awesome if I spent those 1,000 hours learning a new language or playing the violin? I would actually be high level in the real world, not just in a game. And so that led me into a journey of thinking about two topics. One is, how do you make games where the more time you spend on it, the more productive your real life is? You're successful from a career standpoint, you're healthier, you're closer to your relationships. And also how to make real life more interesting and fun. because most people think, you know, real life is kind of boring and mundane. You just have all these chores you have to do, and maybe watch some TV or play some games on the side. So it's how do you make that more interesting? So that led me on a journey, and at UCLA, where I went to college as an undergrad, my first year in college, I started my first business because I just saw it like a game. It was like really fun. You have your resources, you have your goals. You know, people define sometimes a game as just voluntarily tackling unnecessary obstacles. You know, sometimes adding blocks and difficulty makes it fun. If it's too easy, no one wants to play the game. Yeah. So I started a few businesses. So I started one and led to another one, led to another. And I never started my companies because I had this huge vision of, you know, I want to be rich or have this huge business. It was just fun. I just enjoyed it. It's like a game. And I learned a tremendous amount from it. Yep. It's of course a lot of tension and stress. Yeah. And I definitely have more failures than successes. Yep. But just like a game, you never beat a game the first time you play it, right? If you do, that's probably a bad game. Yeah. Right? You have to fail many times, die. It's like, okay, that's why I died. And the next time, I got to stage 3 this time. Yeah. And then, now I got to stage 5, right? And so it's like evolution, and you grow from that.
Which could basically be what we're doing right now.
Sure.
In our little 80-year game
that
we play. Can you beat your previous high score? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. And I really enjoyed when you mentioned the period of time in between games where you came up with this realization that how can I make what I've learned applicable in the real world, and how can I help design games and gamification, and then starting the businesses. So continue us on the path.
So I started a lot of startup companies, and the term wasn't defined yet, but they're all, in today's terminology, all in the gamification space. And you can imagine that was very, very early, right? 2005 is when I started my first company. And nowadays, I think most people, even if they heard of gamification, they've heard of it in the past 3 to 5 years, right? So 2005, I was the crazy guy who just had this vision, and I just wanted to do it. And I was very lucky, very blessed, because over many years, organizations, companies, even governments started to realize how powerful this could be. And so they looked around, and I happened to be the only person who's been doing it one of the only people who's been doing it for so long. And so I started getting a lot of opportunities. Now, the big turning point in my life was when I started to gather information about, okay, what actually makes a game successful? Why are we motivated in a certain way? Why are there things that are important in our lives that we know we should do? Working out, eating healthily, focus on productivity, not procrastinating, but we just don't want to do it. And then there's things that are generally not that useful. Going on Facebook, playing some games, it doesn't really help us real life in most senses. But we just spend sometimes 8 to 12 hours a day doing that. And so I did the study, and then I ended up deriving this framework called the Octalysis Framework.
Yes.
So I shared it on my blog, and it was instantly picked up. So within a year, it was organically translated into over 16, 18 different languages. And so on Twitter, I'd see like a conference in Russia, and it's an image on their big screen, they have my Octalysis Framework there. And I don't understand any of the words, but it's like, that's my Octalysis Framework.
Wow.
And so then I started to be able to lecture some of that at Stanford University occasionally. I do workshops and talks at Google, Lego, Huawei. I do some advisory for some governments, like for the Singaporean, the UK, and Bahrain.
Huge. Whoa.
So it was just very, very lucky where I did something, and it stuck, and people really resonated with it. They saw it was really useful, and it grew from there. So then eventually led to what I'm doing today, which is Octalysis Group, which is a consulting design company that helps other companies utilize this understanding of motivation and engagement to drive more business metrics. And then there's something I call Octalysis Prime, which is an education platform for people to learn about all the things that I've acquired in my life through a gamified fun platform.
Yes.
This is where I am today.
And Yukai also has 400 plus of these 5 to 10 minute videos explaining what he's learned in his life. So he has a lot of content, and this is part of the Octalysis Prime, which is part of the network of people that you're teaching what you've learned to. And this is growing really quickly. I want to highlight something else that you said. which was you basically through your life, really from like UCLA until now, you really got deep into the question of why. And the more I realize that the guests that come on the show, they get to the why, they don't necessarily stay at the surface level of spending the time doing things, but they've actually went into the why am I doing what I'm doing? How can I build, like you did, a framework that showed the amount of time that I spend on Facebook and what that does for me versus the amount of time that I spend getting to my goals and what I care about, and how that compounded actually helps me with my success in my life.
The reason why is that if you just look at what and how, that will give you skills. But if you look at why, that gives you wisdom and insights.
Yeah.
And wisdom and insights tends to be more applicable throughout your life.
Yes. Yes, let's start breaking down the actual Octalysis framework. So we have 8 core drives to start, and then around these 8 core drives we have game design techniques. Okay, so let's do this.
So first of all, it's called the Octalysis because it's a combination between octagon and analysis. I always thought it's very intuitive, but sometimes I work with a client for a year and then they suddenly realize that it's some kind of happy epiphany.
It's a portmanteau.
Yeah, they're like, whoa, it's like that. And
octagon
so I want to share it early. So the origin of the Octalysis framework is I want to understand why some games are extremely successful and some games are not. And sometimes they're just clones or copycats. They look, for most people, identical. But again, one is very successful, one is not. So I want to understand what was the delta, what actually made things successful. And I noticed a few things. Number one, it's not because one game has these game design elements and the other doesn't, right? They're copycats, they both have leveling up, Easter eggs, they both have achievement symbols.
Yes.
But again, one's successful, one's not. I also noticed it's not because of the graphics. Sometimes the visually stunning game is a huge failure, and the relatively ugly, low resolution game like Minecraft or RuneScape achieves massive success.
Yeah.
So what I end up realizing is that at the end of the day, every successful game has now what I call the 8 core drives of motivation.
Yes.
So I put it on an octagon, and so in here you'll see the center, those are the 8 core drives that motivate all our behavior. And then outside there's these different game design techniques.
Yes.
There's an example list that can bring out those 8 core drives. Now, this is a pretty busy chart, so usually I like to just focus on the center, so I think there's another image just on that center one.
Yes.
But the unique thing about those 8 core drives is that every single thing we do inside or outside of a game is based on one or more of these 8 core drives, which means that if there's none of these 8 core drives there, there's zero motivation, no behavior happens. You know, people watching this show even, they're watching this because of at least one of these 8 core drives. It could be core drive 7, unpredictable curiosity, they're just curious.
Yes.
Could be core drive 5, social influence and relatedness, a friend invited, shared it to them, or a colleague said, hey, check this out.
Yep.
Could be core drive 2, development accomplishment. They actually want to improve their skill levels and take their work to the next level. Yeah. Could be core drive 1, epic meaning and calling occasionally. Some people feel like, hey, this is where the world's going, this is changing the world, I want to be part of it. Sometimes there's a scarcity factor, which is, oh, this speaker only appears in this country or this show once a year, so I would like to reprioritize my schedule to show up. When I do these internal corporate workshops, a lot of it is based on core drive 8, loss and avoidance, which is, I don't want to lose my job, so I show up. And hopefully, eventually, it's converted to other core drives. But the key thing is, if these 8 core drives are not there, then none of the audience would be watching, you wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be here, customers are not buying, coworkers are not working, nothing happens. So,
interesting. So these are all whys. The 8 core drives are whys.
Yes.
And then we're gonna get here, but when the core drives are more in this white hat gamification, more in this self-actualization part of the hierarchy, you're gonna get a deeper meaning and purpose and fulfillment than if it's in the scarcity, avoidance, unpredictability side of things. Yes. So these are the 8, and then there's also the extrinsic on the left and intrinsic.
So
on
the
the
key
right.
is that these are the 8 core drives, and it's graphed on an octagon shape for a reason. The top core drives, I call them white hat motivation core drives. So they make people feel powerful, in control, they feel good. But there's no sense of urgency. So people can procrastinate because they're full in control, right? They do it whenever they want. The bottom core drives, I call them loss or black hat core drives. So if you're always doing something just to avoid a loss, just because you can't have something or just because you don't know what's going to happen next, it's still extremely powerful in motivating our behavior. But in the long run, if that was the only motivation, it leaves a bad taste in our mouths because we feel like we're not in control and we do want to drop out. And then we have what I call left brain versus right brain core drives. The left side, I call them left brain core drives, which I always make the disclaimer, it doesn't mean that it's geographically on the left side of your brain, but it symbolically represents our logical brain versus the right brain core drives that symbolically represent our emotional brain. Now, what's interesting is the left brain core drives deal with what we call extrinsic motivation. Things you do for a reward, purpose, or a goal, but you don't necessarily enjoy the activity itself. So once you obtain the reward, you hit your goals or you get used to the reward, it gets stale, you stop doing that behavior. And intrinsic motivation is about things that you just enjoy doing to the point that you're even willing to spend money to experience. And even if you lost all your progress the next day, you would still want to do this fun thing today because you just enjoy it. And so when you look at this diamond, it's very interesting. The white hat core drives are the things that we actually want to do on a day-to-day basis. And if we actually do it, it makes us happy. So things like epic meaning and calling, pursuing our faith or making a difference in the world, changing lives, development, accomplishment, achieving mastery, improving ourselves, empowerment of creativity and feedback, which is more about self-expression, about creativity, meaningful choices, right? So if we spend time doing that, it makes us happy. We just don't do that. We spend most of the time doing the black hat stuff. So loss and avoidance, the deadlines, scarcity, the exclusive offers, unpredictability, what's on Game of Thrones, what's on Facebook, what's on Instagram, right? So we spend all our time doing that stuff, but it doesn't necessarily make us happier. So that's why some solutions say, well, how do we get us to do the white hat things? Well, there's two ways, right? Number one is to remove the black hat triggers, which means you go to the mountain, you go to the beach, you go to the dojo, right? There's no more black hat triggers that says, oh, this offer is going to end in 2 hours. You should do it right now, right? There's no FOMO. You just focus on the white hat. Or you add black hat to the white hat activities to compete. And this is where, for instance, you hire a gym trainer to call you a loser for not working out, right? It feels bad, but it makes you prioritize it makes you work out. And it eventually leads to core drive to development and accomplishment. Like, oh, so you thank you for pushing me so hard that I can accomplish things that I couldn't do on my own, right? And so those are the two things. Now, what's interesting is then you can look at the dynamics, even the corners, right? Unpredictability and curiosity, that's core drive 7, it's on the right bottom. And so this one is what we call intrinsic with black hat. So intrinsic as in our brains enjoy it, but black hat we feel we're not in control. So this is like the gambling core drive. But let's say when you watch Game of Thrones or some show you like, it's core drive 7, unpredictable and curiosity, because our brains enjoy it, but a lot of times we're not in control. Like we want to go to bed at 11 p.m. and then we end up binge watching until 4 a.m., right? So, and one interesting example for this is about the intrinsic natures. Let's say if you sit there and you press a button for 4 hours straight and you're guaranteed a paycheck. That's kind of boring, right? That's like a job at a factory. Most people don't like that. But if you sit there and press a button for 4 hours straight, and maybe you'll get a paycheck, maybe you won't, maybe you'll lose money. Suddenly that's casino gambling. And a lot of people like that, right? It doesn't make any sense. The same behavior, one, you're guaranteed to pay out, the other one, you're most likely going to lose money. That's how the casinos make so much money. But our brains prefer the latter because we're literally paying for the intrinsic, enjoyable experience of maybe I'll win, maybe I'll win, maybe I'll win. You're not doing it for the extrinsic reward per se. You're doing it for the intrinsic motivation, the experience. And so people come out of the casino, they'll say, hey, Yukai, I lost $200, but that was so much fun. Let's come back next week, right? And so it's exactly what we call intrinsic black hat. We don't feel the control. That's why you have gambling addiction, but we enjoy it.
I see why 16, 18 languages around the world this has been translated.
I think it's way more now. This is on year 1, yeah.
This was on year 1, and so it makes sense that it gives us a deeper perspective into the why behind our behavior, and then, like you said, it's about designing systems that enable us to pursue the epic meaning, accomplishment, empowerment, the things that give us the self-actualization and transcendence, and potentially designing things that take us away from a scarcity, an avoidance, unpredictability. This is very, very cool. I want to, okay, let's continue by bringing us to how this relates to the hierarchy of needs.
Okay, so to lay down some context, there's a ton of behavioral models, motivation frameworks out there, and if you go to one of these conferences, you'll listen to a speaker talk about something that's really intelligent, really amazing, but then just like, well, there's so many of them, right? How do they even connect to each other? It's all talking about the same brain, and what should I use when I go home and work on my project, right? And so since it's, like I said, it's talking about the same brain, so there shouldn't be all these different dimensions that can't connect to each other, right? And so what I like to do is I like to use the Octalysis framework to look at all these behavioral frameworks and models and start putting them in context. How does it fit to the Octalysis? And so far, every single motivation model I have been able to do that successfully. And so here's the Maslow's hierarchy, and the reason why this one is interesting is probably the number one most well-known motivation model out there. Now, the validity is debated at times, but I think it just has the most ubiquity of everyone believes in that. And as you probably know, the idea of the Maslow's hierarchy is that it's that you have your basic needs on the bottom, and once you satisfy your basic needs, then you work on the higher needs that make you happier. So you go from physiological needs into self-actualization, like you mentioned, right?
Yes.
So if you look at a different chart where I match how these different needs connect to the 8 core drives, you can see here that on the top you have core drives 1, 2, 3, and those are the white hat core drives. Epic, meaning, and calling, development, accomplishment, empowerment of creativity and feedback. In the middle of the triangle, you have core drives 4 and 5, ownership, possession, which is about security and safety, and social influence and relatedness, which is about love and belonging. And at the bottom of the pyramid, we have things like core drive 6, scarcity, core drive 7, unpredictability, and core drive 8, loss and avoidance. So it's almost like you can put an Octalysis octagon on top of this triangle and just say, hey, look, the top ones are the white hat, the bottom ones are the black hat, and there's a reason for that.
This was so cool when you showed me this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for that. It's because the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy and the black hat motivation is based on motivation from what we call the reptilian brain, the crocodile brain, the primitive survival brain. And this is why, again, I talked about black hat motivation makes people take urgent behaviors, but they don't feel like they're in control. And it's because we feel like we're hardwired to do these things for survival, right? And talk about loss and avoidance, you're avoiding danger, unpredictable and curiosity, you're exploring new lands, scarcity and patience, you are going after scarce resources, right? It helps us survive.
Yeah.
So, but if we spend all our days doing that, we don't feel good about ourselves because we feel like animals, primitive animals.
Yeah.
And so the top of the pyramid and the white hat core drives deal with things from the neocortex, which are like, oh, what is the meaning of my life? How can I achieve the best possible result that I can achieve? How can I get to my full potential? How can I have more self-expression and autonomy? Right? Those are the things where that makes us happy, and if we spend more time doing those things, we feel more human. And so that's how the Octalysis framework connects to something like Maslow's hierarchy.
This was so beautiful when you showed this to me, and it speaks to how interconnected your why, the Octalysis framework, is to something as popular as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how we designing the code of civilization and the frameworks and resource flows to help get us to meaning, accomplishment, and empowerment for every single one of us is one of the most important things that we can do.
Yeah, and one time a person asked me if I took the Maslow's hierarchy as a basis and then designed the white hat black hat based on that, and that's not the case. I literally studied games and I created the framework, and then I realized for every core drive there's a lot of scientific research behind it and research and studies, so I started expanding my understanding of it. And then after all of that, years later, I'm like, hey, look, you could actually correlate that to all these other models, and there's a ton of them we can do.
It's
but
so cool that you did it that way. Yeah.
So
yeah, that means that you're doing it, I think, then in like you said, most people have to go to the most hundreds or thousands of years old knowledge or wisdom and build off of that, but you built it and then looked back at the wisdom and said, whoa, it overlaps, which was a big aha moment that you're on the right track.
And I can tell you why studying games end up being so fruitful. It's because if you think about traditional psychological experiments, it's like you have a class with, let's say, 100 undergrad students, and you divide them into two groups, right? And then you let them do some kind of experiment, but with one group, there's one change, right? And if that second group with the change behave different from the first group, there's like, oh, that change actually is changing that behavior, right? And if they can replicate that experiment in multiple classrooms, then it's scientifically proven to change behavior. Now, if you look at games, right, every single game is like a petri dish of hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of test subjects, all voluntarily changing their behavior based on the design. So you can say, oh, we added a bit more unpredictability, and suddenly everyone changed their behavior. Oh, we added a bit of scarcity, and you can look at why some games people can play forever, like chess, and it's still fun, and why there are games like Farmville where people are excited about it for 8 months, and then they suddenly hate the game. They just want to quit, and when quitting the game feels amazing. And so you can start to identify all these patterns. So it's a lot based on output about what actually comes out of human behavior in a petri dish simulated environment. And so the insights derived from that actually turns out to be very valid.
I love the way that you talk about it. Like the game becomes nested. It's a simulation. It's a petri dish within our own petri dish, which is civilization. Our own. So figuring out what games to make within the game of civilization that maximize self-actualization, self-transcendence, meaning, and purpose is important. The games that are taking us away from the things that we love, away from meaning and purpose, get rid of.
Our brains need those 8 core drives. So either we find it in the real world or we find it in the gaming world, right? Epic meaning and purpose. We want to have more purpose and meaning in our lives. And so people who feel like they're changing the world, they don't want to play games. Every day they wake up, they don't want to go to bed, right? They wake up, they're doing it, they don't tire out, they're just workaholics, they hate taking vacations. Why would you take them away from their favorite game, right? But then if you can't find these things, then it's like, oh, I guess I'll go into a game world where I'm saving the world there. I'm defeating this demon or this alien species.
And they find epic meaning. And this is why we see so many people that lack meaning in the real world play games and find epic meaning in the virtual worlds.
Absolutely.
So either civilization updates its code where we can help all 8 billion people find huge amounts of meaning and purpose in the real world, or we'll lose 4 billion of them, or to the virtual worlds, which we kind of see in some of the books.
And so it doesn't have to be meaning and purpose itself. That's just one of the 8 core drives. Ideally, it's white hat or intrinsic. So either you let them feel a lot of space of expression, self-expression, creativity, or you let them feel socially connected people. Some people feel underappreciated everywhere they go. So when they go into the game world, they feel appreciated, right? So guess what? They're going to go there very often, right? Unpredictable curiosity. Oh, every day it's mundane, same things, same old, nothing to anticipate. But in the gaming world, there's all these unpredictability curiosity designs, everywhere from loot box, Easter eggs, new content showing up, and it's just you never know what's going to happen next, and that again connects to almost like the gambling brain.
Totally,
you just want to be there again and again. So the Maslow Hierarchy is a nice base, but then I think what's also interesting is the self-determination theory. I think you have that too. So
I'm just so fascinated by the trajectory of civilization. Because Octalysis gives us another. It adds to our worldview, and if a bifurcation based on socioeconomics or whatever may happen, and we see a Ready Player One style scenario of lots of people living in virtual worlds to find meaning and fulfillment, and the physical world not being in a state of as much flourishing as it could potentially be, I think that one of the main reasons why we would have ventured into that line of the Civ code versus the Civ code where all 8 billion people are experiencing flourishing, and we have a utopic style of civilization on a grand scale, multi-planetary, etc., is because we just didn't have enough of time to slow down. We didn't prioritize slowing down to think about what kind of a long-term civilization we wanted to build. And so we have to prioritize maximal flourishing for all beings and fulfilling the basic physiological needs for all beings and prioritizing that.
And this is a problem when the world's getting more and more data driven. Like data driven sounds very great, it's sophisticated, it's intelligent, it sounds good. The problem is it can come, and the thing is that society isn't controlled by one entity, right? It's many little ecosystems at play with each other. And as these ecosystems get more data driven, what happens, they'll do things that create immediate results. And the problem is, because black hat motivation drives urgency, like I mentioned, when you're too focused on the data, you're always going to do more black hat motivation, right? You put what we call a torture break on, which is those designs that says you have to wait 8 hours before you can move forward unless you pay $1 or whatever. Yeah. It's like, wow, we did this, and then people are paying tons of money and they're coming back 10 times a day. It's amazing. And they're telling all their friends about it. So let's do more of that. Let's put more torture breaks on, right? And so society will get more and more black hat because it drives results, KPI driven, right? Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily make us happier, so people burn out. And that's why nowadays we're at the most advanced civilization in history. We're technology advanced, on average, we're flourishing. Everyone has smartphones.
Yes.
But, drug abuse and suicide is higher than car accidents now. So car accidents used to be the number one in the US. Now it's those two, and you can see there's a huge emotional problem in the society that's flourishing economically.
This is one of the main arguments that we have to Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature. It's just true in so many ways that we are experiencing the greatest civilization. Simultaneously, why are there such high suicides? Why are there such high emotional ailments that are causing drug abuses and addictions? So I think this is ties directly into the Octalysis Framework, and it's so fascinating talking to you about it. So so we have these three innate psychological needs that comprise the self-determination theory of student motivation.
So this is just another example of looking at different other models and frameworks. This one is one of the most well-known. It's the self-determination created by Ryan and Daichi, and it's popularized by Daniel Pink, and the book is called Drive. And he adds, so in the self-determination theory, it talks about, oh, surprise, humans aren't just motivated by getting a reward and avoiding pain. They are motivated by these three intrinsic motivation factors, which is competence, it's relatedness, and autonomy. Daniel Pink adds purpose to that list, and he changed competence to mastery, which sounds cooler. In a longer conversation, I argue that it's less precise. But if you look at the self-determination theory and you relate it to the Octalysis Framework, so I think there's another chart about that.
Yep. And this is kind of finding yourself in a state of flow when you're self-determined and motivated to pursue actualization. At your certain level of competency, a certain level of relatedness and autonomy that you have with what you're doing. And then, so here it is related to the Octalysis Framework.
So if you look at the Octalysis Framework, purpose is obviously connected to epic meaning and calling, core drive 1. Competence or mastery is tied to development and accomplishment. Autonomy is connected to empowerment of creativity and feedback, which my definition was about self-expression, autonomy, and meaningful choices. And relatedness obviously is connected to social influence and relatedness. And so you can see that the self-determination theory covers all these white hat core drives, right? It's on the top of the octagon. So it's very, very good there, but it doesn't necessarily, for instance, explain why people are addicted to gambling. It doesn't talk a lot about the black hat motivation core drive, scarcity that creates obsessive behavior. And I think it doesn't have to, because the goal of the self-determination theory is to get people to do creative work for the long term. And we know that white hat motivation is great for that, getting people to be creative, work sustainably, whereas black hat is about the short-term transactions. Like you want to get people to give you their credit card, or like a 2-week competition, but it doesn't make people feel good. Where if you look at behavioral economics, for instance, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, a lot of that is more on the left bottom. It's about ownership, which is the endowment effect. It's about how to deal with scarcity, how to deal with risk and avoidance. Right, and so that's on the left bottom because it's behavioral economics. It's dealing with extrinsic stuff, right? And it's dealing with black hat stuff, but it doesn't really talk about why people die for higher meaning and purpose. Right. It doesn't talk about people do things just to be creative because it's not economical just to be creative. So with this framework, you can just start to look at people's work and understand, okay, where in the spectrum of motivation is this piece of work more focused on? And you can develop your knowledge there, but also understand the context of it.
Yep. And like you said, it's so important to be able to overlay how certain frameworks have a proclivity to talk about self-actualization and transcendence, but how Octalysis is able to have the why for that and the why for some of the black hats that happen across the world. Okay, so within Octalysis Prime, you have, this is where you have 400 videos, 5 to 10 minute videos. People can join Octalysis Prime. That's on the link below with yukai-chou.com. And can you give us an explanation of this beautiful graphic that you have here?
Okay, so the motivation for me to start Octalysis Prime was manyfold. Number one is I was a little frustrated with, we are doing all this great work for companies and government, and a lot of our projects are over $100,000. And obviously we're helping big companies make more money, but my passion is really help everyone live through my experience, learn things I can. Of course, that's obviously priced out of their range, right? So I wanted something that people can learn more. So that's the first thing, just more of a B2C type of model. The second thing is, one of the frustrations I had also was I would design these solutions for companies, and I think it's amazing, but what they end up creating is like 20-30% of what I designed.
Interesting.
And as a creative person, when we talk about core drive theory, empowerment of creativity and feedback, right? When you design something creative, you really want to see how well it works. You want to see it flow like magic, makes you happy. And so I wanted something that I had full control over. Like I wanted to show, like, this is how a great education platform could be like. And the challenge there is, how do you make it less linear? Most education platforms are, you do this 10 modules and you get an achievement, a certificate or badge, and you do this 10. So 1,000 people would be doing the same thing, and they take all the same actions. There's no meaningful choice, there's no strategy. So my question is how to add core drive theory, empowerment of creative feedback into this, so people can choose a journey, they're growing differently, they're unlocking different power-ups. They can strategize. Literally 3 weeks ago, one of my OP members created a strategy guide on YouTube about how he chooses to grow in this journey, what he feels is the most optimal.
That's great.
Yeah, so when people create strategy guides,
that's huge.
On an experience, there's meaningful choices, right?
Yeah. Because that strategy guide was a major part of the gamer culture as well. You would get strategy guides that'd be released on how to best play the game of civilization.
Yeah.
So this is the best way to play OP.
So it's not linear when people can do that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, a lot of people reach out and say, hey, I've read your book like multiple times, I've watched all your online videos, yada yada. Where do I go from here? Right? And I mentioned to you earlier that the book, which is already 500 pages, it only has about 15% of the knowledge base that I can share.
Yes.
And so my goal is, okay, this is where the journey continues, right?
Yes.
We assume that people are on the island. Of course, there's all this basic content too, but a lot of them will already have the basic content, and it's about pushing that to the next level, level 2, level 3 Octalysis, applying to your happiness, your career, your well-being, relationships, and just everything that I've learned in my life, and I want to pass down to my twin daughters. I want it to be on Octalysis Prime. And then finally, another goal for Octalysis Prime is, when I work with companies, I feel like I'm using the same body of knowledge that I already have and applying different scenarios, which is really fun and interesting.
Yes.
But I feel like I have less bandwidth and time to expand that knowledge base to begin with. And with Octalysis Prime, what's nice is it allows me to continuously research more things, read books, scientific journals, expand that knowledge base, and then continuously share my latest research and insights to the members.
Yes.
So now there's a ecosystem for me to just learn, which is intrinsically motivating to me.
So this was formed, so the Octalysis group is where you're doing a lot of the consulting. And so you took the framework, the Octalysis framework, and you started doing consulting for companies that would pay for you to help them understand the white hat, black hat, extrinsic, intrinsic, all these 8 core pillars of whys. And then you also realized that you put about 15% of the data into this actionable gamification book, and then said, I also want a platform, so that's Octalysis Prime, where you can have people come in individually, not at the 100K level of corporations, but at a smaller level where they can learn like 50% of your content base, paying a monthly to get access to 50%.
So the goal is to get to 100% of my knowledge.
The goal
base.
is to get to 100%. Correct.
But that base is still growing too.
And like you said, you enter in as your individual character into the Octalysis Prime, where you get to pick. And this is this then part of this graphic?
Yeah. And this is where you're playing. So this is where you learn the materials. This is where you're playing.
And so the center place, the Octalysis, the center, is what you've been describing to us throughout the show.
So far.
Is these 8 pillars, yes. And then everything that you see around the Octalysis are things that people get to pick to journey.
So this is kind of like what I mentioned. If you can vaguely see that the island is based on an octagon shape, and so there's different contents. There's things about persuasive technology, which are things created by B.J. Fogg, and the offshoots. Near Isles' work and Hook, and a lot of people like it's in that school of thought. Then you have behavioral economics, that's on the left bottom, extrinsic, more black hat. So that's Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, that's Richard Thaddeus Nudge. That's also growing legs. You have applied psychology, which are things like Robert Cialdini's work on influence, and also Oren Klaff, where he talks about how he uses behavioral psychology to fundraise, right? So there's gameful design, which is people who like Jay McGonigal, talking about how game can empower the world, make it fun, make it engaging. So these are all disciplines that complete this body of knowledge. And of course, at the top there's what we call motivation psychology. So that's Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory. It's the self-determination we mentioned. So all that stuff adds together to a picture of understanding how the mind works and and inside the Octalysis core is how do you apply it again to your well-being, relationships, career, to your happiness and finding your purpose. So, and understanding those 8 core drives. And then we have all these little mechanics in it too, where I have weekly office hours. I spend an hour answering member questions, helping them design or helping them change to improve their designs. There's a Slack community that people are helping each other a lot on. There's challenges. There's daily chess where they get Chou coins and they can do all these interesting things with it. So what inspires me is there's a lot of high school teachers on this platform, and so the platform is $50 a month. There's actually a power up in core drive loss and avoidance that turns into $30 because you want to avoid paying bills. So like every core drive has multiple power ups depending on what you're learning. Students is a $20 a month. So it's not like $10 like Netflix, but it's much cheaper than a college education, right?
Oh, totally.
My comparison is that it's like a gym membership.
It is,
right?
yeah.
Which also means that you don't pay the money and you transform lives, right? You pay the money, then you put in the time, you engage with it.
That's right.
And then we've seen lots of members, they've raised their funding, raised funding for the startups through it.
Yep.
A guy was a music teacher, and then he became a interactive game designer for a music education company. So it's like his dream job. So we do see transformation through this. And so it just makes me happy to see all this stuff happen. And it's the project I want to leave for my daughters.
That's right. Yeah.
My friend was saying if he gets hit by a bus, he wouldn't be able to pass down his wisdom and knowledge to his young daughter. And I thought about it, no, I'm safe there because everything I feel like is worth learning in my life, I'm putting on Octalysis Prime.
What a profound way of thinking is that. What have you learned in your life that is such great value that you would want to build a really robust way of disseminating that for future generations, especially your family, your community? That's a very important thing to leave behind in life, and I'm glad that you've done this.
So I truly believe in this stuff. Like my twin daughters, Symphony and Harmony, they're only 16 months old. Starting from 6 months old, I'm already exposing the Octalysis framework to them, getting to be familiar with it. Of course, they don't understand, but they're building what we call emotional associations with it, cognitive ease with it. Yeah. Because I believe sincerely, like even in my own life, if I learned the Octalysis or discovered the Octalysis framework even a year prior to when I did,
absolutely,
I believe my life will be totally different. I use this knowledge on an hourly basis. It's amazing, and I can't even fathom my daughters being Octalysis framework natives, like knowing it at 1 year old, like how they live their lives and how powerful they can be in driving it. And then the next thing is, how do you install the right values, right? You're using this for good, for meaningful things, not just to be successful yourself or for things that harm society, right? So you got the skills, the abilities, but then the values is all, like I have a whole video series on Octalysis Prime about how to teach them, for instance, like family pride and values, right? Oh, it's like you should do this because you're a Chou. So even they say, oh, how come Bobby doesn't have to do that? Well, because he's not a Chou. You're a Chou, which means you always do the right thing. You know, it's just like, you know, Game of Thrones, you're a Stark, right? You're a Lannister. It has that type of motivation, is a little bit of the epic meaning and calling.
Yeah.
Your family lineage and your values, and it sometimes they don't like to think about it, or they argue against when they're younger, but it sticks with them throughout life.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples is in Smallville, Lexer, right, which is Superman's chief rival. His dad always says, you're a Luthor, Lex Luthor. So you're a Luthor, and Luthors aren't afraid. You don't back down for fairly. He was very harsh on his son. His dad was a successful business guy. And so Lex Luthor was trained like, I'm a Luthor, so I should be brave, right? He hates his dad, but he got that installed. So imagine how much motivation you need to have to be the villain against Superman, all right?
Yeah.
You have no superpowers at all. You just use your brain. It's like, no, there's Superman hanging around, but I want to be a villain. I want to be his rival. You need a lot of motivation there. And so for good or for bad, family values and pride passes down, and that's, again, core drive one, epic meaning and calling.
It would be so interesting to see young kids, even as early as 3-4 years old, in these preschools and kindergartens, doing things like talking about scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset, self-actualization mindset. Like, what are you finding most interesting? These are very powerful frameworks to get to kids. Because the process of how to actually implement this into people's lives and implement it into corporations and stuff is very important. That you have this process: player, desired actions, feedback, stats, business metrics, win state modes, incentives.
Yeah.
All these things are applicable.
So some people learn the framework and they're like, okay, I know how the brain works, but how do I actually apply this to my project? And when we talk about how, you know, we have design projects that's, you know, over $100,000, we have a 5-step process. And the first step is doing this, what we call the strategy dashboard. It's defining a few components that lead to new ones. You know, business metrics, what you're trying to improve, your players, who you're targeting, the desired action, each step you want them to do. Each desired action leads to a win state. You got feedback mechanics that trigger desired actions, and people use it to track progress towards the win state. And these are rewards and incentives that are embedded inside the win state. So that's step one. And what's interesting is, you know, once you do all 5 steps, that's a robust project. We teach every single step in detail in Octalysis Prime.
Yes.
So we're not holding back anything. It's like literally what we teach our consultant, we teach in Octalysis Prime. And actually we've hired a lot of Octalysis group consultants through Octalysis Prime. So the joke is that Octalysis Prime, the education platform, is a feeder for my consulting company.
Yeah.
And it's literally just because, you know, this stuff is deep enough. I don't, like, people have been trying to learn it for 5 years, and they're just like okay at compared to what I think is excellent. I don't mind people getting exposed to all of this, because I know they're not just gonna like study it for two days and suddenly, you know, make a whole living just based on that 2 days.
The amount of companies that you guys have helped is crazy. That those are very, very prominent organizations, and it's good that they're starting to have a solid understanding of what is the whys.
Yeah. So what's unique is that these companies are a lot of their, you know, healthcare and insurance and banking, finance, education. And so the sweet spot of gamification are things that are extremely, extremely important, but potentially mundane and boring. So I don't work with that many gaming companies. Usually, if my friend has a gaming company, he wants me to be advisor, I say yes, but I tend not to do it, because my passion is not to create better fantasy worlds people can escape to. My passion is to make this world so much more interesting that you don't have to go there.
That's right.
And so one of our projects is we work with the largest steel manufacturer in the world. And, you know, our project is to reduce injuries. So it's to make safety behavior more fun and exciting. It's to make reporting and removing hazards interesting, exciting.
Yeah.
We recently launched the loyalty program for Porsche in Austria.
Wow.
So it's like you drive with your Porsche, and then you can earn different rewards based on your driving behavior.
Yep.
And it also allows you to upgrade to your next car in the Volkswagen family, including Porsche, more easily. So those are all fun things to do.
At your TEDx talk, you also gave the example of where there's people that are making it so that the little speed readers on interstates are, if you're driving within the speed limit, you get entered into the lottery where you can get a chance to win the proceeds from people that are driving over the speed limit and get fined. So there's all of these interesting ways to gamify our world, and it's also cool that, like you said, it's even down to the steel mill. How do you actually make it more safe for people to be there? You're literally reducing the amount of injuries, and therefore increasing the amount of families that can stay together and these types of things.
Yeah, it's not quantifiable, but I'm 100% sure that my work has saved lives in the past. It's hard to measure because you don't know the lives that would have been lost without that environment, right?
Yes.
But just the thought of that makes me happy, because we work with insurance companies, we work with companies that motivate people to drive safer or work safer in the factory. We work with a lot of healthcare, well-being type of companies, and so those projects are really what makes me, because I have this certain skill set that I've concluded that is very, very powerful and useful, and a lot of my projects are to help big companies grow bigger. But then some projects are really just to help, like talk about getting foster kids to build up their self-esteem, to get people with diabetes to have better behavior, to save the Amazon rainforest. So all these projects are just really inspiring to me, and I literally have so much respect for people who just work on that, right? They dedicate their whole lives to just work on that, where I'm just like, hey, that's a nice project. Yeah, I did some impact. Good. I'm happy. I'm proud of myself, right? But I have full respect for people who just who consume their life just on that one mission to make humanity better.
Yes. And you're bringing up one of the most important examples of how an Octalysis framework embedded into healthcare is extremely powerful to get people living healthier, happier lives, and that's an immediate reward. There's an immediate feedback to the decisions that we make with exercise and nutrition and sleep. That's immediate feedback, and then that also gives a long-term healthier life as well. And I'm glad it being implemented there is so crucial. On the way out, Yukai, we have to talk about seeing our world as a game and seeing our world as code. We talked about this a little bit earlier with civilization acting like an experiment in a petri dish, and then embedding other games within the petri dish and seeing how those evolve. What would you say are some of the most important lines of code to augment within civilization in order to maximize the amount of actualization and transcendence that occurs?
Well, it depends on who's the co-writer, because there's, from an individual standpoint, you can change your mentality to see life as a game. That was my big epiphany.
Yes.
And I suddenly thrived at everything I did. There's the government that can do things that can change to make society more gameful. There's company organized. So there's educators. So it depends on what angle you're coming in from.
Give us a bit from all of those if you can.
Okay. Yeah, so from an individual standpoint is to see life really as a game, because the thing about a game is that a game is about you have your goals, you have your current resources, and you have obstacles, right? And the idea of a game is to figure out how to use your current resources to get through those obstacles and reach the goal. That's actually much closer to our work in our real lives, right? Most of our work is not like what we study in school, which is memorize a bunch of stuff and regurgitate it onto a piece of paper, right? Which is why actually playing games does help you have better problem-solving skills and all these things. So, but when we see this in this framework, imagine a game where you just go straight forward, and you win. That's like stupid and boring, right?
Got to be obstacles.
Every bad guy obstacle in the game is a chance for us to be awesome and get more points and win, right?
And learn.
So in our real life, we should have that mentality. A lot of people have this victim mentality. They're just like, oh, why is this obstacle? Why is this bad guy? Why do you have an enemy? My life sucks. And they go in depression, right? And I said, no, that's your landscape challenge, right? You don't complain about your landscape, you figure out how to overcome it, right? If there's none of these obstacles, then the game's boring. You just kind of live your life as if nothing happened, and you get old and the game's over, right? So that mentality is important. Think about it from a networking standpoint. Some people have this scary like comfort bubble, right? And they're like, oh, I don't want to reach out to people. What if they get upset about it? It's like, well, if you look at a game, RPG games, You walk up to an NPC, and it says, "What are you doing here? Get out of here!" Right? You don't feel sad or upset or anything. It's like, okay, maybe I'm not high level enough. Maybe I need to get a certain item, right? You're just like, I'm not qualified yet, so let me go do these other items, and maybe I'll come back to this guy and he'll talk to me because I'm a higher level person now, right? It's that mentality that really changes all this stuff. It's going from like, I'm just a victim in life and all these things I have no control over to, hey, I have what Jay McGonigal calls urgent optimism, which is I believe if I try, I can reach the win state, but it's urgent, I have to do it now. And that is a great type of psychology. In Jay McGonigal's book, Super Better, she talks about there's difference between hope, optimism, and self-efficacy. Like hope is believing that there is a positive outcome and it could happen. Optimism is thinking that the positive outcome is very likely. But self-efficacy is a belief that I affect that positive outcome. I can make it happen, right? And self-efficacy is a great psychological state. And I think that is what decreases depression and whatnot. So, so when I saw my life as a game, I just thrived at everything I did. Before, and then I was still a student, I studied just enough to reach my acceptable grade, and I stopped. And I started playing games, right? But when you see for your life as a game, you're not just going to do the minimum. You're going to do the best you can.
That's right.
Right, and so my life literally changed when I saw it as a game. And there's so many different analogies, so many ways to optimize this game.
This is very profound, though. What resources do you have now? How do you allocate them to overcoming the obstacles that are in front of you in order to level up the most and achieve this golden goals that you have, these milestones along the way of your self-actualization and transcendence? And then seeing your landscape that way is very profound. Okay, and then for
another thing is focus on your journey more than the result. Like a lot of people have fond memories of playing the Super Mario game and in the original Super Mario game. Very few people I talk to have beat the game. But it doesn't matter. No one's like, oh, I don't beat it, so I'm depressed, or I can't beat it, so I'm not going to try. By playing it, you're winning, right? The only way to lose is to not play. And so that's another mentality. So when you look at the government, I think the government could do things. First of all, our work, we always have to define where you're targeting, what's the desired actions. And so once the government can define, okay, these are the things that make society better, whatever it is, right? Either it's making people flourishing. Andrew Yang, who's running for 2020 president, he says the economy needs to be measured in a different way. It shouldn't just be about GDP. It should be about human capital and thriving, right? And flourishing. So it's like, well, if we know people who do these things will make society better from a humanistic standpoint, then it's about, okay, how do we add emotional triggers to that experience? How do you add more meaningful choices and self-expression? How do we add more social influence, willingness? People feel like they get to collaborate more, they feel more social appreciation. How do we add more unpredictable curiosity? So there's new, surprising, delightful elements. And so you can create a society with these type of rules. One interesting example is the Taiwanese government. In the 1958, they actually gamified tax collection. They turned tax collection into a lottery game. And instantly, that year, the whole government's tax revenue increased by 80%.
What?
Because people were evading taxes, and because they made it fun, and people wanted to play the lottery game, they reported everything more honestly, and then suddenly they almost doubled their government revenue. So there's story. So there's all these type of examples. Governments can do. Educators, right? Educators can make learning fun. I think that's by default, where people feel like, oh, now just traditional way of, again, memorizing things, putting a piece of paper, it's not that exciting.
And being coupled with the student's outcome as well, just like a doctor being coupled with the patient's outcome.
For sure. And so now, because information is everywhere online, like students don't lack access to information, they lack access to a coach, to guidance, mentors, right, to context. And so the educators should see themselves as a friend that allow the students to thrive, as opposed to a top-down, like I'm your superior, so you listen to my orders kind of relationship, and then they can make learning a lot. So there's a lot of projects like Classcraft. This is a company that I have a lot of respect for. There's a lot of ones that are just very boring, but Classcraft is great. And so it's just making learning more fun. Hospitals can, I've seen different projects from.
I know you and I could talk for so long. I want to also, you have Mother coming into
Yes,
town, and we want to pick her up on time and everything. We can, we'll do another show at some point, maybe over the summer, where we can get deeper into a lot of this and inspire other people to get to view the worldview in this light and from the why perspective of the Octalysis Framework. And it's very profound hearing you teach about all of the different examples as well. We can get deeper into that too. Couple really quick questions on the way out that we like to ask our guests on the show. Do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
So this is something that I don't have I don't know the answer, but from a probability standpoint, I think it's likely that there are other, if you're talking about alone as living species, I think it's likely that there are living species out there.
And the next question is, do you think we're in a simulation?
Also, no real knowledge of that, and it depends on how you define simulation, right? I believe that, and I'm actually a spiritual person, so I believe this world is kind of like a simulation, and it's almost like when our lives ends here, that's like we stand up from that computer, and then it's like, okay, how did you do in the game? Did you spend all your time getting things that don't really get you points?
Yeah.
You know, like being successful in your career, or you actually spend time doing things that actually accumulate points, which is being kind to other people, you know, and loving others and things like that. So
working on hard projects, overcoming obstacles.
So I believe from that viewpoint, you know, we are in a type of simulation, and we're put into this role, you know, whatever it's your gender, your race, your origin, that's your role. Just like in the game, you have a warrior, you have wizard, and it's how you play this role, how well you play this role, right? But after the game ends, none of that matters. You stand up, you're just like a high school gamer, just like everyone else who's playing the game. And so that's my personal belief.
I love it. Yeah, keep leveling up, right?
Yeah.
That's a really profound way that we like to just help people with that notion. I'm glad that you have that view and mentality. Last question: what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
My quick thought about that is forgiveness. I think when someone forgives something dark and painful, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. You guys, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on to our show.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been such an honor. I'm so happy that we had you on. So much profound wisdom came out of it. Everyone, actionable gamification, the link is below. Check it out. Also check out the links below to Yukai's website, his Twitter, his books, and also join Octalysis Prime if you want to implement some of what we've been talking about into your lives, and also get the direct video mentorship of Yukai. And thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate your love and support watching this episode. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Also, share some of the Octalysis Prime whys with your communities, your friends, your families online. Go and get sharing and talking about this. Also, support the people that you believe in, the artists, the entrepreneurs, the organizations around the world that are trying to fulfill some of these basic physiological needs and help people with self-actualization. Support them. Simulations links are below. Help us grow as well. And go and build the future, everyone. Manifest your dreams into the world. We love you so much. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you soon. Peace.